Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Luis Alvarez. I'm a co-founder of Avery and Company. We're a Miami-based, data-driven, high-conviction investment firm. And today we're coming together to really look back at the most recent changes to our portfolio companies, share with you what are the companies we sold, a little bit of the reason as to why, and then also share the exciting news of the four companies that we just bought here in the last few weeks and give you the basic thesis for those investments. We will spend a little bit of time beforehand talking about philosophically who we are and what's sort of the underpinning of our investments at Avery. Before we do that, however, we'll read a small disclaimer. I'm going to pass the mic to our head of operations, our director, Houston Hess, who will then invite my co-founder, CIO, to share with you some of these changes to the portfolio. Lastly, I guess in terms of format today, any questions that you guys have, please post them in the chat or in the Q&A box. And at the end, we'll wait till the end to basically field these questions out. And welcome. Hey, go ahead, Houston.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis. And welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a good turnout to the webinar. I just wanted to read a quick disclosure. This presentation is for informational purposes only. No information contained in this presentation constitutes investment advice. This presentation should not be considered a solicitation, offer, or recommendation for the purchase or sale of any securities or other financial products and services discussed herein. Certain statements contained herein may be statements of future expectations, opinions, and other forward-looking statements that are based on Avery's current views and assumptions and involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results, performance, or even to differ materially from those expressed or implied in such statements. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sean.
All right. Yeah, thanks, guys. A lot of people on the webcast, so that's good. Just for housekeeping, I'll be on Bloomberg later today at 4:20 after, the president speaks and, talks about the tariff stuff. They just invited me to be, one of the first speakers to speak after that, so that's cool. In addition, this will be recorded, so keep that in mind as instead of having to take notes the whole entire time, you can, we'll send this out. But I do think, at the very beginning of what we're trying to do is always level set with with the idea that, what is our philosophy? Like, what are we trying to achieve from an investment perspective? So I'm going to be quick and dirty here, 2-3 slides. But again, this really summarizes it here, which is what a successful business looks like. I talk about this a lot. Some people see this repeatedly, but we're really looking for these secular winners, and we're also looking for companies that are transitioning their business to realign to where the world is going. We think ultimately those are the two areas of which we can find dislocation in asset prices. Right? And that's ultimately what matters is, can you find an asset that is dislocated relative to what we think it's worth, have some sort of foundation of what that how do you get to those numbers, and then obviously have time. Some of the changes that Luis was referring to, meaning some of the companies we've sold, pretty interesting in terms of thinking about the trajectory. They weren't straight lines by any stretch. And that just comes with the territory of investing in the liquid market. So the areas of opportunity for us are these, right? One of the newer ones is identity, and you'll see one of the newest companies we added to the portfolio really is around that concept of identity. We think as more and more systems, technology, different points of computing, whether it's wearable devices or headsets, all this stuff is like hackable. All this stuff needs, some sort of identity to them. As social media and deep fakes and all these other, things continue to arise, I think identity will be more and more important. So you'll hear about that today, but we just level set that we're trying to invest where the world is headed. And these are some of the areas where we think, things are going. Now, the process, this is the last, page of philosophy, I promise. But we take our companies through a process, discovery, follow, focus. Many of the companies we added to the portfolio here today, not today, but recently, um, we're ones that were in our discovery and follow phase for a while, meaning multiple years we were following these companies, to the point where we then did a deep dive, what we call the focus phase, which, given some of the macro uncertainty that's happening, has created some of the opportunities where some of our companies have done well during that time, and it allowed us to then reallocate that capital into, some of the more beating up names that we added. Now, some of the recent changes, these are the changes we made and the history of them. So Nutanix completely sold out. It's quite sad to see because we had the founder CEO on our podcast. With Dheeraj Pandey, we have a good relationship with the team there. But at some point, you have to have some sort of discipline. But we bought that originally, in 2019 or so, and a little bit after, for on an average, Avery cost basis of $22 a share, and we sold it around 75 to $78 a share, multiple years later. And all in all, it was roughly like a 3.5%, 3.5x return over that time frame. The interesting part of that journey was, we were down a lot in Nutanix throughout that journey. And, when it was all said and done, we made quite a bit of return. So it's just a reminder that things don't happen in straight lines. Nutanix was a company that the average investor in the investment world doesn't know what they do, much less, trying to articulate that from our standpoint to our investors was never so easy as well. But that's Nutanix. So we got out of that, and hopefully one day we get back in it. It's a great company. Wix.com, we sold. I've owned Wix since 2011, really, in multiple journeys at my prior firm, all the way to Avery. We owned it the first 3 years. Then COVID struck, and it went all the way up to $300, $400 a share. We didn't own it then, or we didn't sell it at those levels. We sold it elevated, and then we rebought it back a couple years back, only like 2 years ago. So we went from $68 cost base at Avery to roughly 206. We sold a little at 220 and a little at 195. And again, sad to see Wix go, because that team have worked closely with for many years. Planet Fitness, very stable, easy to understand business. Brick and mortar. I tend to like these brick and mortar businesses. We do at Avery, and it's we owned it for a couple years. It was our second time owning it as well. We've kind of had, like, if you think about it, we have these repeat purchases of companies we know really well. But again, this has been the sales, like the full sales, like selling the entire stake in them versus trimming some. So we did trim some here recently with, like, Zillow went up to like 18% of the portfolio, so we just trimmed that back down to like 14, 12. Still a big weight in our portfolio, and we have a lot of high conviction there. But it was more just to make a little room for some of these others. Those three sales led up to 24%, fresh capital. And the importance of that is, when you sit here and you look at markets being volatile, I think it's important to understand we're not, just holding our ground per se. We're trying our best and looking at little, tactical opportunities where can we make a tactical move for like a structural, longer term play, which is, can we sell some of these three winners that actually all three of those were hitting, anywhere from 2-year highs to, 80-year highs for Nutanix, while the rest of the market was falling down. And so it was truly like fresh capital that, didn't lose money, and then using that to then buy. So it's almost like saying, hey, I had 24% cash, a week ago, and we redeployed that to some extent. Now, our new investments are these four, Clear Secure, really around identity. LegalZoom, it's a household name, everyone understands it, but hopefully, I can give some substance to what's happening there. First Watch, some of you may know what it is, some may not. If you're in Florida, and I see, some familiar Florida people here, this is a big market for Florida for First Watch. If you're in Arizona, and there's a couple of folks on Arizona here, there's some over there. Mr. Car Wash is another Arizona kind of like semi-native company, but also pretty pervasive in Florida. So there's a lot of meat on the bone on why we like these. So what I'll do now is kind of go through them. And the first couple, are a little bit more extended versions of the thesis, but I'll make sure we save some time for questions. at the end. But Clear Secure, if you walk in the airport, you see these little kiosks. And that's what everyone knows Clear for. 7 million paid subscribers to the platform. So they have this reoccurring revenue base of 7 million. We track like website traffic, and they get 41 million unique visits on their websites, which is pretty big when you just think of all the other types of platforms that are out there. Clear is the only private company approved by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to verify identities at airports, and I think that's an important strategic or competitive advantage. That some of these others, there's not really others. That I think that's the key thesis here. Products. So what do they do? What are their products? Why now? That's kind of like our process here, and then a little bit of valuation discussion. But they have the Clear Plus membership, which is really that airport identity. If you go to the airports and you have a Clear Secure membership, you can go into the Clear line. And that takes you to the front of the line at TSA. So, an important distinction of like what the actual product is, right? Some people think it's the way to get through security. It's really to get to the front of the line of security versus get through. So if you have Clear plus TSA PreCheck, then that is the fastest way through the airport. If you're a business customer, if you travel often personally, it's a valuable perk to have for what is considered a pretty meaningless price when you actually think about maybe how often you could be using it. TSA PreCheck is also another product offering for them. So in the last year or two, really the last year and a half, they got approved like 3 years ago, but they went live about a year ago with TSA PreCheck, where you can apply or renew your TSA PreCheck through Clear. And this is important. I'll get to this in a second. The last one is Clear One, which is for corporate enterprise and identity, type of solutions. I'll talk about the customers they have there, but Clear Plus is a cash cow for them, meaning their airport security business. TSA PreCheck is a high margin, new business line that people sign up and, they generate revenue off of, high margins as well. And then Clear One is really what got us to really think that this is going beyond just the airports. So why now? Why are we looking at this now? So web traffic to TSA by Clear is now surpassing the third player. So this is web traffic. I know there's a lot going on here, but the takeaway is this: there's 3 vendors that are offer to approve people for TSA PreCheck. You have Telos, you have Clear now, and you have Idemia. Idemia, is very pervasive inside the airports. If you go to the TSA line and you get the facial recognition, that is an Idemia product. They're out of Europe. I've talked to customers there. I've talked to employees there. It's a very slow moving organization, but at the end of the day, these are the only 3 vendors. And we started tracking how many people were going to the TSA website for Clear, and you could see that there was a pretty big inflection point. So they started, right about a year ago, and they're already around, 20th or 20% of all the traffic. So they surpassed Telos, who has been doing this for a long time. And we think they're on their way to, continue to capture more share from Idemia. And how TSA does it is they actually, if you go to the website, like type in like TSA PreCheck, whatever you want on Google, and it'll send you to the TSA site. They'll have 3 buttons, one for each one of these vendors. They systematically rotate those randomly, and then you click it, and then that takes you to one of these portals, and then you eventually go through the process. Now, Clear is the only digital native product, meaning you can do it in the app and apply or renew in the app. And then they're strategically going around the country creating, places you can go to actually verify yourself. So you can go to like Staples, they just partnered up with Simon Property Group. So you can go to many of the Simon Property Groups. If you're out in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of Puerto Rico people on here. They just launched you can go to the mall there as well. But they have, over 90 locations now across the country that you can do it, other than just going straight to the airport and going to their kiosks and getting approved that way. So that's obviously a way you can do it as well. Now, why now? Another part of this is not just the TSA PreCheck. And how they make money on TSA PreCheck is, on a renewal, they make $15. On a new application, they make $20, and all that is margin. So it's all like free cash flow for them. Why now as well as these Clear One deals. So again, they're moving outside the airports and much more into the commercial enterprise setting. And you can just see here just headlines. This is the Community Health Network. This is public.com, which is kind of a brokerage firm out there where if you're trying to onboard on a public.com, you can use Clear to verify yourself. LinkedIn. So if you're trying to verify yourself on LinkedIn, and a lot of social media or those type of platforms are trying to verify their users. Clear is one of the vendors that they use for verification. UHealth as well. So like if you go to like the University of Miami Health and you're checking in, they'll verify you or give you a line or a QR code to get in line at the facilities. So you're verifying or self-verifying yourself before you even go. So no longer do you have to go to like the front desk and show an ID as much, right? You're verified. So we think this type of solution will be more and more pervasive across what we're doing in our day-to-day lives. They have a partnership with Uber, Avis, and then last quarter, right before we made this investment, they announced 20 new deals. And again, so we think this is a high margin business that is really in its early days of growing. They have really big banner, logos that they've won so far, and it gets us pretty excited about what this can be. And we have a good relationship with talking with the team there, so that helps a lot as well. The growth drivers for this business: Clear Plus membership, so increasing price, and then location expansion. Price on the Clear Plus membership. So some of you may have Clear, and sometimes you'll go and those lines will be clogged up. Obviously, they're trying to increase the throughput, meaning speed up the technology and the ability to get through the lines faster. That's something they're really focused on there, just talking to management. But also is, they've for a long time they kept the same price for the last 5-10 years, even when they had 19 locations across the country to now being in pretty much every major airport. They also have wholesale agreements, meaning if you guys have Amex or one of these other vendors that give like discounted offerings, they're trying to pull back a little bit away from that and then increase the average revenue per user. And ultimately what that does, in our opinion, is it creates much more of a premium offering, which is truly what it is at the end of the day. But then they also have the TSA pre-check, right? So if you're just trying to get in, you're still trying to go fast, but you're not trying to go through, in theory, like cut the line. They do the TSA pre-check, applications and renewals. And it's a funny, interesting, balance between that, because if you're Clear and you keep approving people for TSA pre-check, you keep clogging, you're going to clog up the lines even longer on the TSA pre-check, which is going to make the Clear lines much more valuable, in our opinion. So it's kind of like you can win in each direction and pull levers, just given the fact that you're the only one there. But price, location expansion, so obviously adding more nodes to the network. We'll talk about the their economic mode. But TSA pre-check market share of renewals and new. We think they can capture roughly 20-30% of all that market. And obviously is Clear One for corporate identity. Moving into different verticals, they acquired a company for identifying yourself inside of the banking system. So let's see what they're doing there as well. And these are really the growth drivers for the business. And how are we tracking this stuff? This isn't like real information they give you. This is us taking some of the information they get and then slicing and dicing it ourselves to try to figure out how is the non-airport business doing. So they give you a number of like how many additions they had, and then we can take those numbers and slice them to try to figure out how many of those members are likely not coming from the airport business. And what we see is that business is growing roughly 82%, and it's roughly like 90% roughly of all enrollments that they're having. So when someone enrolls, if I verify myself on LinkedIn, that's considered like an enrollment. That is continuing to grow. So they added 2.2 million enrollments, which again is just expanding this network of Clear users, and that becomes actually a flywheel for Clear Plus, the airport business as well, right? Because you start seeing the name Clear, having that brand, identity, I think is important. Also, when you go to like UHealth, everybody knows what Clear is, right? If you go to the airport, it's like a marketing banner for them. So it makes it a lot easier for them to go to LinkedIn and some of these other companies. When you go in there and you say, hey, we're the only vendor approved by the Department of Homeland Security, I think that puts you like up here versus, somebody that is a startup that is trying to create identity solutions. Who's the management team? What we know for sure though is that they're really well incentivized to do well for shareholders. They own roughly 20% of this business. Karen, she started a hedge fund, Arian's Capital, $1 billion fund. And her and the CFO, who is actually just leaving, but Ken Cormick, they started Clear. They actually bought it out of bankruptcy at their old firm and then took it over because they thought it was pretty interesting. So she still runs it. She's the co-founder CEO. She's very high energy, and she's done a great job thus far. Uh, Economic moat. So again, what's like the defensibility to this business? So this one's more obvious than not. Meaning, they're like a one of one inside the airport, but actually, as they continue to penetrate more markets, the more valuable that their product and solution becomes. The more locations, the more value. If I go, Miami to Orlando, and I can use Clear on both sides, or to Phoenix, or something like that, like Boston or New York. That just means, again, I have more touch points to use the product that I'm using, and that becomes a real network effect solution to it. There's other product lines and things that they've thought of, not just getting approved to go in the line, but what can you do before the line and outside the line, and what can you do internationally? So there's more meat on the bone for them to tackle. Now, valuation walkthrough, not to get in total of the minutia, but they're really friendly on share, dividends. They do one-off dividends because they generate so much cash flow a year. This company trades at something around 10 times cash flow, depending on the day here. But this is a $2.9 billion enterprise value business, zero debt, $600 million of cash. They're doing about $300 million of free cash flow. We assume that we have like multiple different assumptions, but one is just getting from 7.2 million users, subscribers, to 8 million subscribers, taking the average annual payment from 129 per subscriber to 199, which is again part of the growth, increasing pricing, capturing 20% share of TSA renewals by year 5. We actually don't capture in our models any Clear One revenue, like the enterprise business, even though they're generating revenue already and they have big logos that they've already won. The reason behind that, it's not very clear, how they're, how and what, the threshold of revenue opportunity is there just yet. And then we keep free cash flow margins steady. And ultimately what that gets for us is, a business that is worth, somewhere between, 1.5 to 2.5 times, the business it is today. Some of the risks that people think about is, obviously there's a single source of kind of power that could displace them. TSA could literally say, hey, we're done, and we don't need you anymore. That's not necessarily what we're seeing, specifically today. Like I think the administration, at least now, and these things can change, is focus more on private, partnerships versus, trying to do everything on the public side. So you could say that's, a win actually this past weekend. It's just a headline, but it was saying, possibly getting rid of, the TSA, which would likely be a boon for someone like Clear. So I'll go to the next one. Again, if you have questions or anything, put them in the chat. Luis has already fielded some questions, but and we have some questions already, but the next one is Mr. Car Wash. Then I'll go a little bit faster so we can get through these. But this is a asset heavy, expensive to build with a subscription business. That is a powerful model. It's very similar to like a Planet Fitness type of philosophy, meaning you build these massive things that cost a lot of money. You put a subscription on it. You put a lot in an area, and then it becomes really, really difficult to choose a competitor. And in addition, it's hard to compete against because if I'm not going to build a car wash next to them if I know they have 70% of their customers are subscribers. I'm gonna have to rip them, make them cancel their subscription, come to me, and it just seems like a hard thing to do. They have 2.1 million paid members today. They're the leading vendor in the space with only 500 locations, and they're adding a roughly like 35 a year so far. What we like a lot about them is that they've been around for a while, so this isn't like a overnight success story. But as they scale, the success I think compounds on itself. But they've had success both acquiring existing car washes, re-platforming and putting the Mr. Car Wash logo on them, but also building from the ground up and, buying, getting the land, building and, building brand new ones. And in that case, what they do is they then sell it to, a private equity group, a private credit group, private real estate, and then lease it back. So they create the value, they get into it, the deal at a much cheaper price. Now their product lines, you can imagine, and it's a subscription car wash. I think, many of us have maybe driven through them before. But in general, different offerings, the base tier, the platinum tier, the titanium tier. They also have a retail tier, right? You just go in and you pay a one-time fee. Typically, if you are one of those people that, like to get their car washed more than one time a month, then it's a no-brainer to get, a subscription. Now for them to break even on a subscription, someone has to go to the car wash like 24 times a month. So there are cases like Uber drivers or something like that are power users of this stuff. You could argue that, this whole Uber driver, phenomenon over the last decade has really fueled some of the growth here as well. But they have these different tiers. Their titanium tier is their newest tier. They launched that about a year ago, and already 20% of members have gone up to that. And then they have roughly like 25% of their business comes from retail traffic, meaning the people that drive there one time and whatnot. From a high level thesis for us, this is a fragmented industry that is hyper local. And when you get into a market, meaning like in Orlando, Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, and you put 12, 13, 14 around this, and 100 miles of square square miles, it's very powerful, right? So because it's fragmented, there's a lot of opportunity there. They're actually today bigger than 8, 9, and 10 combined, which shows you kind of like the scale that they have. The market, looking at different surveys and stats, it's going to a do it for me instead of a DIY, meaning, washing your car at the house, which is totally fine. But the trend, the actual trend using stats is that more people want to go to these like subscription or like do it for me type models. And then markets in general, consumers in general, are moving towards, more subscription, more understanding what you're paying for, when you're paying for it. And what that does for a business like Mister is obviously create a consistent cash flow. I live in Miami. I passed by a car wash the other day when it was pouring rain for 2 days in a row. Historically, that would have been a zero in revenues. But now you have this consistent cash flow. So you went from kind of like this very transactional business that was subject to weather patterns and conditions to one that is consistent, and the weather no longer impacts the monthly cash flows. Yes, you want to drive retail, the ones that go in for the one-time car wash and then upsell them into a subscription. So you do lose that when bad weather strikes, but it's a much more subscription oriented business. This shows that how many of their members are members or subscribers. So in 2010, 15% of their members were subscribers. This wasn't a subscription oriented industry for a long time, pretty much forever, but until recently. And today, that 74% of their business comes from their unlimited wash club members, and their best locations do around 80 to 85% penetration of subscribers. So when we look at that, we think there's still more room to run to get their whole entire base up to that 80, 85%. So there's more room to drive more subscriptions. Now, why now? For this type of business, right? And on the left, most people don't even know what that is, but this is just basically showing anticipated rate cuts for this year. We think, conceptually over the next 12, 18, 24 months, if it takes 36, so be it, rates will continue to moderate lower. And as they moderate lower, the cost of capital will continue to come down. And if you're building 5 million projects and then you're building 35 of these on a year, and then you're taking that and then redeploying it as well, the cost of capital coming down is a big tailwind for somebody that is, asset heavy. And then you have this subscription business, which, obviously provides you a much more, successful kind of like financing rounds. On the right, you see that some of the car wash competitors have gone bankrupt. So this became a really hot industry like 7 years ago, really. and private equity started to really, shovel money into this industry. During COVID, like 21, when the cost of capital went to zero, private equity was coming in full aggressive. They were buying these things, levering them up, and then trying to just get that cash flow out of these things. And these weren't operators; these were financial, acquirers, and that has led to some issues in the industry. So somebody that has been doing this for 25, 30 years, like Mr. Car Wash, who has built it themselves, who has acquired themselves, is strategically in a good spot to continue to take advantage. So cost of capital coming down, plus the idea of that some of their competitors are really starting to struggle, opens up the door to them to acquire some of these businesses, but also continue to win markets, um, around the country. Growth drivers, new unit expansion, 30 to 50 annually, 35 today, meaning this year they guided to 35. We think over time, that'll get to like 50 to 60 as they continue to generate more and more cash flow. Cost of capital comes down, so they can, use a little bit of leverage and their cash flow. Again, this is a high cash flowing business. Member growth per location, adding more members per location. We talked about that, and then driving more and more retail traffic. And then revenue per member growth plus revenue per visit. These are the two. So obviously they added titanium, but we also think, they just changed their retail single transaction prices. So if you come in for one wash, it used to be a certain price, and for a long time, like 10 years, and they just raised it, for the first time ever. And so you can see a small uplift from 25% of their business just off that. Now, this is looking a couple more slides here, but some of the stats, right, is location count. So you can just see the consistency of ads over the years. And then you can see the consistency of, revenue per unlimited car wash member going up. And again, that's because they added that titanium tier, and 25% of their members are now on that tier. John Lai, he's been with this company since 2002. And he's, ran everything there. This company is really well regarded for, training their employees and making sure that, it may sound small, but, when you show up, the people at the front are smiling, and, doing the right thing. So that has allowed them to grow successfully, pretty slow if you really think about it in the grand scheme of how long they've been around. Well, slow, methodically, over the last 22 years that he's been there. He has a big ownership in terms of dollars. He's the seventh largest shareholder. So again, an alignment from a perspective. Here's their moat. I mean, if you think about it, you can just see how concentrated they are in certain areas. And again, that's kind of it. So like they have these local network effects. So obviously, if you have a car wash in Miami and you have a car wash in Arizona, that doesn't matter. Like my car's not going to be over there. But if I have, there's US one here in Miami, and if you had, 6 of these on the same, 20-mile track, and then offshoots off that, there's clear, economic network effects to that, where, your office is over here, your home's over here, and they're on the two tails of that. You have a car wash that puts you in a pretty strategic place, not only for, the members, but then you have to think about, your service contractors or your service team that is trying to fix this stuff. The more you have in a small density, obviously the cost of servicing these things reduces. Barrier of cost, right? So building these things for $5 million is no small feat. So that will restrict a lot of people from just jumping in, unless they know what they're doing. Evaluation walkthrough, again, last slide for Mr. Car Wash, but our thing is 6 to 8% location growth a year. That's probably on the low end. 1 to 3% same store sales. They just did a 6%, so we're clearly being fairly conservative there. Steady 25% margins that they've consistently had for a long time, and then applying a 10 to 15 multiple, and that takes you to roughly anywhere, again, from like 1.5 to 2 times where it is today. So again, like 150 to 200 plus percent upside that we think this is worth. Again, we think over the next several years, his cost of capital comes down, and the fact that they're really well positioned in the marketplace to continue to capture this trend of subscription and of the car wash business. We think they'll continue to do well. Next one that is more oriented on like a conscious consumer. We think this is truly a growth story. I actually remember seeing this, when I went to school, and I thought it was actually a local, restaurant chain, not even a chain, a restaurant, a local restaurant. And that's ultimately what, that's how I first knew it, 15, 16 years ago. They have 572 locations, and this is First Watch. Nearly 35% of all their locations are in two states, Texas and Florida. And they really win because they have a best-in-class employee turnover due to kind of their labor model, and I'll talk more about that. But you can just see here aesthetically, it's a family friendly. They're open from like 7 a.m. to 2:30. So again, it's this single shift for the employees. So people like working there, and if you like working there, you tend to have a good, customers tend to have a good experience because the people working there, are happy to work there. They get home by dinner. They're with their families. They kind of live a normal life, even though they're in the restaurant business, and they're paid well and they're trained well. And all of that is a feedback loop. Every time they open a store, they take managers at existing locations that are successful and then moving them into new locations to open them. So there's kind of, again, this methodical, this is a 30, 35, year old company as well. Products, I mean, this one's very, simple to understand in terms of what they do. Daytime, dining category, which is kind of like its own category. And then they have seasonal menus, and again, the big, thing for them is their one shift employment model. Again, we've invested in, this space before. You think of Chipotle, one of our better investments at Avery. Understanding, do you have a product that is, kind of carved out its own place? Once you get to a certain scale, you kind of have leverage against the competitors, specifically the local competitors. It allows you to, leverage, technology spend to then build your applications, and do many of the other things that, some others don't. Again, very similar, the why now, cost of capital. If you're building, $2 million locations, that is a good feedback loop for, building more. But they're also in the early stages of what we would think of menu expansion slightly, with everything from like juices to some alcohol beverages, to digitization, where they haven't really had a digital solution up until here in the last couple of years, where on Saturdays and Sundays, and I know Houston's a big Sunday eater at First Watch with the family, and he being able to go from like where he is on Sundays to get to First Watch. You can skip the line or join the wait list before you even arrive. And instead of having an hour and a half wait, maybe you have a 10-minute wait, something like that. But more important to that is they've tapped into now the Ubers and some of the others to get some off-premise business going as well. And there's more stuff that they can do, pay at the table to get the tables turning faster. So what we saw at someone like Chipotle, and this isn't apples to apples, but is the digital initiatives that you put in place can increase a lot of things. It provides a lot of data feedback, and then you can then have your servers upsell. So there's a lot of things that going digital or moving more digital can do and assist to a business like this. And again, if you have 570 locations and you're starting to collect all that personalized information, that what someone's ordering, when do they go, when do they don't go, what menu items they like, that is across 570 locations. That's a lot of information versus a local player that has one or two locations, much less data to really inform and make strategic decisions. Growth drivers, you can imagine location growth, density, new states, and I'll show the states, and I think that is ultimately the opportunity here. Higher throughput. So we talked about the digital stuff, continuing to get more people through the door, but also obviously holding the experience right, and then continued menu expansion. So again, alcohol will never be a major part of their business. They're dedicated to being family friendly. So this isn't going to be your brunch, Sunday brunch, with DJs. But it will be a place where, they'll have that offering, and those are very high margin. And that just got introduced here in the last year, after, 2 decades of not having it. The location growth. So here again is just to show you what I meant of the opportunity. So you can just see all these states that have kind of this healthier options. They have cage-free eggs. They have all these other, more health conscious ingredients that I think, again, consumer habits continue to shift that way. And again, it's pretty priced pretty well, meaning it's, it's kind of like this elevated, healthy-ish, experience, but at a pretty reasonable price. But the opportunity set, you see all these zeros here. California, they're not even in, and this is very much a coastal kind of opportunity. They have over 120-ish or 133 locations in Florida alone. So you can think of like a state like California. You can think of a state like Texas, which only has 68, and some of the others where they could easily open up a lot. So there's a lot of room for opportunity to penetrate different markets. The CEO of the company, he's been around there for a long, long time. Again, he has, enough capital in the business. He came in as a CEO, and, has $10 million at stake, and also obviously compensated based on, what the company is doing. Economic moats, again, this category in general will never have like, the Apple, Microsoft kind of moats. But you can carve out, certain things that really differentiate you from, your peers. Obviously, scale matters in this place, but also I think for them specifically, having satisfied guests consistently because you have this, repeatable kind of training program, and then having a process where you're taking successful managers, putting them into the new locations, and then continuing to promote within. So the bigger you get, the more people you have, the more successful managers you have, and then the more times you can consistently apply that roadmap to your new locations. And it shows up with some of the stuff like Yelp's number one place to work, and 8, 13, 19 years average tenure for directors and operations. Like the average is 19 years inside the company for some of these functions. Just tells me something's going decent, at least here internally at the company. We tried to look at like a brand, right? Because this is very much a brand kind of story, right? And First Watch, we tried to compare it somewhat to the new version of Denny's, and those aren't apples to apples again as well. They're not trying to be Denny's. They're not trying to have like the late night culture or anything like that. They're not even open past 2:30. But it's more the idea of like this Sunday daytime eating type of sit with the family and have food, but with a health conscious elevated kind of brunch spot. The interesting part is they have 572 locations. Denny's has, almost 1,600, and social on the social side, social media, they kind of are on par in terms of following. So you could say like First Watch like completely outkicks its location base relative to some of its peers. Here's another way to look at it. It's aided awareness. How many people know of the brand versus guest satisfaction. And on the right, I can start on the right. So like First Watch has guest satisfaction, and these are like independent studies, that 77% of guests are satisfied. That compares to 65 for Starbucks, 62 for Chipotle, who's like absolutely crushing it. Shake Shack, which I don't know anyone that hates Shake Shack, but 66% are satisfied. And then I can't even see the last one there. Was that Panera? 67%. And then you compare that to the aided awareness, meaning, how many people know of it. So, 40% versus 99% for Starbucks. I can only imagine, I should have had a poll here of, to see who's actually, eaten at a First Watch. And if not, you should go and send us photos. So you can do that. But this is a pretty interesting chart. We looked at foot traffic of the type of consumer. So when I say like elevated experience, it's backed up by the type of people that are going there. So just looking at this, you can just see that, a high proportion, this is 200,000, income households. This is, 100 to 200,000 income households. And this is First Watch on the left. And this compares to the average diners and breakfast chains, and then the full service restaurants. So you can just see that they have a more affluent, higher earning, consumer coming to their locations, which again, I think speaks to, the ability to raise prices, to add more offerings, and such. This is a different way of, this is the valuation walkthrough, but we actually think there's significant upside here. Assuming they execute well, and we'll keep tracking it, we'll track foot traffic and all these other, variables that we think matter. But if we're right, we do think, there's significant upside here. They said that they believe that they can get to 2,200 locations. We today they have the average location does around $2.3 million roughly per store. And our assumptions go anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000, so below anything they have carved out. In some cases, half of what they've carved out. And we assume they just get to 2.4 million revenue per location, or 2.2. And on a margin base of like 9%, and the average store does around 20% margins. But then you take like corporate expenses, and then you can get to a free cash flow margin of 9 or so. And then we apply a very reasonable multiple. Chipotle today trades at 25, 26, 30 times the cash flow they generate. We're just assuming 12 here. And obviously, if they do get to these level of store counts, the multiple is going to be much higher because they're going to be much more penetrated. But with that, you still get to like 200, 300% upsides, 140 if they get to 1,200 locations. So we're very excited here. Well, I mean, like, we'll keep our finger on the pulse of, assuming the execution is continuing. But it is an exciting story, growth story that we think is, under-loved. I mean, it was upgraded yesterday by Cowen or TD Cowen, so at least there's some love out there for it. So last one. It's LegalZoom. It says Clear Secure here, but disregard that. LegalZoom, digitizing, legacy industries. They have 1.8 million, active legal and compliance subscribers, 4.3 million estate planning solutions they've delivered since inception. And then they have over 1,000 independent attorney networks servicing all 50 states. If you don't know LegalZoom, most people have probably like heard of it. You go on there if you're trying to start an LLC. That's kind of like where you start. I formed LLCs on there, right? You go on there, you click, a couple buttons, and they'll get your EIN number for your taxes, and they have a nice little portal where they'll show you where they are in the progress. And over the last, I'd say, if you look at this product 5 years ago versus today, it's much different. There's also new leadership, and that's part of the story as well. But there's a lot of different opportunities for them to go into business formation, business compliance, legal advice, estate planning. And then other, types of services that, they've tried to offer, bookkeeping, and also, the legal, subscriptions. Their product offerings, I kind of just said them, but business formations, estate planning, legal network compliance, all wrapped into a subscription model. And that's ultimately the end goal. Now, why now? And I'll be quick for LegalZoom just to leave some questions here. But they're historically they've been tied to business formations in the economy, right? And over the last several years, you've seen, business formations, go pretty high. And this orange line is, year-over-year growth. So in 2025, you can see in 2024, business formation growth went actually negative, right? Year-over-year, like the actual growth rate. There were still businesses forming. It's just the growth rate relative to the prior year was negative, which provides a tailwind because obviously now you're comparing formations. So if they're attached to formations, if you're starting a business, you're forming a business, that gets captured here. You're using one of the competitors out there or them. Having easy comparables is a nice tailwind to start your investment with. Now this looks at the leadership characteristics, and I think hopefully what you've noticed so far, all three categories, Clear, Mister, First Watch, they're all the leaders in their categories. Historically, that's kind of been our thing. Nutanix was the leader in their category. Planet Fitness, leader in their category. Wix, leader in the do-it-yourself, website building category. And LegalZoom's the same. They're this whole big blue chunk over here. And then Legal Shield is a valuable competitor. And then you have Rocket Lawyer over here. Cumulative app downloads. So we're tracking app downloads. You can see a recent step up here. Recently they're pushing a lot of people to their app. Additionally, what are some of the growth drivers for this business? Average revenue per user growth. They're trying to increase prices. They're trying to have the LegalZoom brand kind of elevate its price point. They just made an acquisition of Formation Nation, which is kind of like this. I would call it cheaper product of cheaper offering for business formations. And they're going to keep that in that brand, and then LegalZoom continue to elevate the experience there, wrapping all this stuff in subscriptions. Historically, at one point, they were like 55% of their business was subscriptions, and today that's above 60, 70%. And we think the new CEO is trying to push that to this business to be pretty much like a pretty large subscription business, and that will strip them off from being totally tied to what's happening at the business formation level. I think that's super important. It's very similar to like Mr. Car Wash, right? The subscription business gets them a little bit away from weather patterns. This also, it gets them a little bit less, sensitive to, business formations. The shift to subscription, again, steady cash flow. It doesn't only do it, the revenue, but obviously cash flows. They're also trying to grow with higher attach rates and new offerings. The attach rates meaning, if you start a formation, instead of just doing that, they're trying to, upsell you and incentivize you to get the subscription so you can have the formation plus the compliance. So like if you have the, BIOR, which is, beneficial ownership, the I and R, I don't exactly know what it stands for, but, beneficial ownership, the, not, it's in law or not in law, they're going back and forth on it. But if you have a subscription that kind of encompasses all the compliance needs you need as a business, annual filings and stuff like that, like they have a pretty elegant now, calendar ability to see all these things. And then adding new verticals, right? Bookkeeping and some other offerings that they can consistently add. They're going big on partnerships as well. They have a big partnership with Wix. That was actually one of their Wix's biggest partnerships, a couple of years ago, and we think they continue to leverage that. Jeffrey Stiebel, he's been with the company actually for quite some time as an investor and then a chairman of the board. He has a very successful career. He was the CEO of web.com. They sold that. They made roughly 200, +% for shareholders during his tenure there. He started a couple other things, and became very successful at Dun and Bradstreet, or sold to Dun and Bradstreet. And then he took the chairman and then came here to, continue to develop the subscription business. And if you think he looks like Luis, you're right. He looks exactly like him. Now the valuation walkthrough, again, we think this is a very cheap asset. I mean, you have a business doing, $135 million of free cash flow. They're really emphasizing free cash flow today. As they garner more and more subscription business, you can imagine more free cash flow with an enterprise value of, again, 1.3. So you're looking at, 9, ish times free cash flow for this business that is reaccelerating here throughout the year. They guided to the back half of this year of double-digit growth. And we have pretty, generalized assumptions that are pretty small. Subscription member growth of 2 to 3%, ARPU growth of 3 to 5, and then margin expansion. So you get those three things combined, and again, you get a story, where you can get as high as if this is a very successful business, a 15 multiple, roughly 11% free cash flow growth gets you to a $4.2 billion valuation on a 1.3. And at the very low end, on a 9 multiple on 2% growth, you get a 1.4, which is still higher than today. So when we look at investments, thinking about margin of safety, that is exactly what it is. Where, all assumptions, 2% growth on a 9 multiple gets you don't lose money. How about that? And then if you're even remotely, accurate, this could be a pretty successful investment that way beyond what we're talking about here. That's really it. I mean, I know I wanted to open it up to questions here. And I'll open that up. If you got any via email or here, feel free.
Thank you, Sean. We've got a question on LegalZoom specifically. What is the upside and what does success look like in 3 to 5 years?
Cool. Let me move you. Yeah, I mean, look, the upside is I'll go back to that slide. The upside can be, as high as, 4x here, 3x. And I think beyond that, right? Like, I mean, if this is truly successful, you can start, pulling down the the multiples, and you can start going with the growth rate, that way in your spreadsheets. I don't like doing that, but that is ultimately where you can get. If you're just trying to go right down the middle and you're saying, they execute decently well, I mean, you still, double your money. And this is a 5-year target. So like if you go 10 years and they really extrapolate this thing out, you could really see some pretty nice returns now. So that's like the 3 to 5 year kind of look and valuation.
And what's the competitive landscape for these guys?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously we spoke about the Rocket Lawyer and some of these others that show up in the app downloads. Those are the main ones. There are like smaller companies that are trying to like sell free formations and then upsell them into like random other things. Meaning like if you think of like how Wix.com sells domains, right? They're not a domain business, but they're trying to get you to like at least start so that then they can sell you on domains. So think of like a payroll company trying to, sell a one-off formation for free to try to get you into the payroll product. So you get some of that on the edges as well, that I think matter. Like you know, I see a question around risk, like what the risk not only to like LegalZoom, but like in general, like what are the risks for some of these companies? Um, you know, my view personally is, if you're going even company by company, clear secure, I think the biggest risk there is really around, TSA potentially, um, getting upset about something. You could have a moment where, you have somebody go through clear that does something really bad in the airport, right? You think of like a 9/11, unfortunately, right? And for some reason they were, they got through the clear line or something, and validated. That would put a really big black eye on them. They are still the only game in town for something like that, but they've had some occurrences like this. They had somebody that picked up a boarding pass in a garbage can and then got through the clear line somehow. They didn't get through TSA. They didn't get through the actual security. But for some reason, yeah, they were able to do that, and they still added all these members here. So I think one thing they do well is when there is an issue, they solve them pretty fast. They do have credit card partnerships. So like again, if you have Amex, we forecast 20-25% of their members come from like Amex. They just extended it last week for another year. At some point, these type of like partnerships run dry, right? At some point, you've captured everybody that's going to sign up in the Amex ecosystem, and you have to make a decision of like, do you start charging Amex more, who subsidizes this at like the wholesale price, or do you just cut ties and see how much you'll get churn, but then you'll get full price payers, right? So if someone like Amex is subsidizing, a clear secure, like like it's 199, but let's say they're only charging, clear secure, $60 or Amex $60, right? And that's like the wholesale price. Um, that's roughly let's just do it $100 just to make it easy. But if it's $200 at the retail level, meaning if I was going on their site and just buying it myself, it's $200. And then if I'm getting it through my Amex, the actual cost is 100. They would have to lose 50% of their customers at full price to basically break even on leaving the Amex partnership. So at some point they'll leave that. There's a lot of people that would want to tap into the clear, base. That's clear. The LegalZoom, I mean, you know, the biggest risk there is really around execution. Same with I'd say around um the first watch as well. I mean, you could argue there's like so again, there's long term, there's like structural risk. Structural risk meaning, the actual business is impaired and they're going down the wrong path and they've made the wrong, big missteps, or the industry around them has kind of shifted. And then there's like cyclical stuff, meaning like less people traveling, right? And less people going through clear, therefore they have less chance of selling somebody a clear membership, or it starts to rain every day and Mr. Car Wash is struggling to capture new retail customers to then upsell them as well. I do think a lot about for Mr. Car Wash, and I have a pretty nice feeling about it. Is like at some point we're going to have significant autonomous driving, and what does that do to a car wash business? I still think those car washes need to be washed, but I don't think anytime soon, the entire country is going to be full fleet autonomous. If the average person is holding their car for 16 years right now, and you're buying a car now, I don't think you're going to buy a car now and then autonomous happens and you're just going to like sell your car. You're probably going to own it to the life of it, and then eventually we'll have like autonomous fleet. So I think we have 2 decades before the entire like 50% of the population is running on autonomous vehicles. Mind you, autonomous is here. If you go to parts of the country, You know, I was just in Phoenix, and all I rode was autonomous vehicles, and it was amazing. So that's that. That's the answer there.
Sean, could you speak a little bit about, we always explain risk through the lens of, is there any permanent loss of capital risk rather than volatility, measure of volatility. Could you speak a little bit about whether you see any risk to the current economic policies of the current administration and how they may affect the underlying businesses?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're about to learn a lot here in the next 3 hours on tariffs and such, and obviously those are policies that will get put in place and potentially restrict um, certain aspects of trade. I mean, we've done a lot of work in trying to figure out, like, you know, what would be the brunt, even if all this stuff went in. And I think a lot of people are focused on the tariffs themselves and not focused maybe also on some of the other things that are going on, some of the positive benefits that it could, you know, have happen, but also, you know, some of the other input costs that happen to be at the same exact time, um, you know, coming down. So like we just shared a chart on 40-foot containers, right? And the average 40-foot container, which is, we're thinking of tariffs, you know, 40-foot containers, goods go on 40-foot containers to ship to, you know, the US. And we import, you know, 3 trillion roughly of imports. And if you think of that relative to GDP, that's roughly like 13% of GDP. You know, the goods side, like, that's imports broadly. If you think of just the goods part of it, you know, it's roughly 8% of GDP. So 20% times 8, if that's the number, you get 1.6% of GDP is like that tariffed number. At the same time, again, you have these 40-foot containers where all those goods come on, is down 50% year over year. I haven't heard anybody talk about that. And that's ultimately a huge input cost. I mean, there's a reason that was the crux of some of the inflation we saw during COVID was 40-foot containers went from 2,000 to 20,000. Well, they just went from 6,000 to 3,000. Yet we're not talking about that as like some sort of deflationary force here. So that's just like one thing. You have obviously the dollar. You know, it's been stronger over the last, you know, year. It's been weaker over the last, you know, several months. But it, you know, if the dollar was stronger, and, you know, at the beginning of this year, at the end of last year, we had a massive import export imbalance as people seemingly were trying to front run tariffs. You know, I've spoken to people anecdotally that they tried to front run tariffs. You've heard companies specifically during the earnings calls highlight that they're front running tariffs. You have consumers somewhat front running tariffs. I mean, the ex-Ford CEO was just talking about that he saw a lot of demand here in the last, you know, couple weeks for people buying their cars before potentially tariffs go in. Obviously, that's like the discussion of, you know, the month. It'll probably be the discussion of the year, or maybe the discussion of the next 4 years, to be quite frank. And you know, I do think there's a lot of things that have happened to soften the blow. You know, my feeling it is definitely more of a negotiation tactic versus, you know, versus otherwise. You know, we've had these debates internally of trying to think through some of this logic. Is like, if you really wanted to put this and you were very hard line on tariffs, then you just would put tariffs on and, you know, move on to the next job, right? And say, okay, we're bringing manufacturing here, and we're going to then, you know, put these tariffs on 20%, use that tariff revenue and fund manufacturing here. So that's one. I mean, there's obviously the immigration stuff, and then there's also you know, Doge coming in. What interesting, and we share this data internally. I, I'm going to throw the question out there, and everyone just think for half a second. Is like, you like the government spending so far this year, as of April 2nd, is it up or down versus last year at this point in time versus last year? What you would think with all the Doge rhetoric is that the number would be down, that we'd be spending less. We're actually tracking to like 3 to 6% above a year ago. And we started to look in some of the numbers because all this data is public. You can actually track where Treasury spend is going, how much they're spending. And what you see actually is like, you know, go look at the SBA, you know, loans. So for small businesses, basically deploying capital to small businesses from the government is like up like 30% year over year at this point versus last year. It's a pretty big number. And then you take that number, and then you see that the Bank of America Small Business Index is seeing hiring for the first time in 2 years. I think those two numbers, you know, kind of correlate to each other. But no one's really talking about the small business actually doing, starting to like perk up a little bit here. Everyone's talking about the larger companies because they're going to be at the brunt of, a smaller company could be more nimble in this environment, right? A bigger company, they have pricing power. So yes, they can offset stuff and put more pressure on their suppliers for like tariffs and such. But small businesses can be nimble. So, there's a lot of cross currents. What we're doing is we're tracking, credit card data, Fiserv data, last week, the retail sales, it was up 4%. So the retail sales number in February, I don't even want to say it, but I was sitting with a CFO the other day and, he was telling me, some things that, looked pretty well, good. And then Bank of America data is also tracking up, up 4 to 6% in terms of spend. I know this has turned into a macro call, but I'll stop there for now, for the sake of time.
Good, beautiful. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to be able to sit down and share the latest shifts in the portfolio. Sean, thanks so much. Houston, we look forward to seeing you guys in person soon. Take care.
All right, guys, have a good one. And if you have any questions, send us a message. If not, follow our Investing with Data newsletter. Follow me on X. I post a lot. And with that, we're out.